All right. Hello, everyone. Can you all see and hear me without any problems? Very good. So joining you again today from inside of Taranga Commons. I hope it doesn't get too noisy with the traffic that goes through here. Yes. Yeah, if you follow the template, Eric, for your question, if you follow the template and if you follow the instructions I gave you in the lecture on how to write an essay, as well as the extra additional instructions within the template, you should be just fine. Yeah. So the proof of work is fairly straightforward. You just save, I don't know, like two initial drafts. I'm not worried very much for the proposal. For the essay, I'll want more, but you're going to save drafts as you go. So maybe you write like a rough version of your area of interest and your thesis statement, and then you save that. That's draft one. Then you come back and you write a rough version of your plan of attack and throw some sources in there. That's draft two. Then you sit down, go through that, edit it, change what needs to be changed, make it nice, and that's your final draft. And that's the draft I mark. But I look at your other drafts as well. And it's not just to reiterate, it's not just about guarding against AI use. Forcing yourself to write everything in, to write, to step back, take a break, to go back to it, that actually makes you a better writer. Nobody writes everything all at once. Or if they do, they at least come back to it and edit it a few times. So this is designed to kind of make you do that so that the quality of work is better. Yeah. Yeah, Jaden, I will answer your email later today. Um, Alishba says, what I used to do in high school was key all of my rough drafts and work in one doc in separate sections. Um, I'd like it saved as separate documents just to make things a little clearer. But you can, if you have it all in one document, you can just copy the content out into, a couple of other documents and save those. Like, again, draft one, draft two, final draft, and then you're all set. Yeah, you can put random thoughts. I mean, sometimes the first draft is just like bullet points of ideas that you're considering. That's fine too. Some people do this like they do that part, they handwrite it. So they make a list of ideas, of thoughts that come to them, or like a little idea map, right? That's an acceptable initial draft as well. It's just anything you can do to show me that you are the writer and to give me insight into your writing process is really the kind of thing you want to include. And then the final draft is the final version that's got to look like a proposal, right? Yeah, like an outline, Charmin, exactly. An outline could be like draft zero, right? Yeah, I'm not too worried about structure on your drafts. Yeah, only the final one, the final draft. Okay. Um, it's good that you're asking me these questions. Um, looks like everybody who's here really wants to make sure they do everything properly and do the best job that they can do, and that's really good. That's exactly what I like to see. So, are there any questions? Any other questions about that, or do we want to move on to today's topic? And keep in mind, if I tend to answer emails pretty quickly, you can ask in the Discord. If you think of something later, send me an email or pop on the Discord server. I'll try and answer your questions as quickly as I can. Um, but if there are no further questions, oh, maybe possible question here. Yeah, well, if you have like a to-do list, or an outline or an idea map or anything like that, call that draft zero and then submit again, 2 to 3 initial drafts. If you're doing something like an outline, I would still want, say, one or two that show me the link between the outline and the final. Yeah. Okay. So today we're starting on one of my favorite topics, and that is the nature of mind. What is the nature of mind? What is the nature of the mental? What are minds? We all have one. Um, but minds are interesting. Minds are, even though we all have one, it's although it doesn't always seem that way when I'm out there in the world. um, we all have one, but the mind is remains a mysterious thing, a difficult sort of thing to understand, um, more so in some respects than in others. But just look at how rich our mental life is. Um, we tend to talk about minds and our mental lives in terms of states, different kinds of mental states. And we've encountered a number of these already. Um, Beliefs and desires are big ones. So philosophers talk about those a lot. Um, but also um, states like pains, pleasures, which we regard also as bodily states or somatic states, but there's also a mental component to them. Emotions. Likewise, with pains and pleasures, emotions are embodied, but there are mental aspects to them. Um, and all of these mental states, we tend to think of as somewhat different from physical things, right? Like, for example, if you're in a state of pain, um, pain hurts. Ouch, right? You hurt yourself, feels like something. Um, that seems like it's not just your nerves firing, right? In this case, your C fibers. It's a type of nerve fiber that fires when we experience like physical damage, right? The actual pain sensation seems like something different from the physical um, nuts and bolts of it all. And so that's kind of like immediately what we're struck with when we start thinking about the nature of the mind. Mental states, mental items seem quite different from physical states or physical things. They may not be, but they seem that way. And recall further that in philosophy we talk of propositional attitudes. We can understand a lot of these mental states propositionally. So remember, propositions are statements about the world. Generally, they contain a that clause and they have a truth value. So again, the example here is snow, I guess because I wrote this in the winter. I don't know. Um, but if I believe that it is snowing, I have a propositional attitude, namely belief. It's a propositional attitude because it's an attitude of belief toward the proposition it is snowing, which may be true or false. Another way of putting this is that I believe the proposition it is snowing is a true proposition. Um, and the same goes for desires, right? I desire that it stops snowing, for example, or I desire that I don't know, go build a snowman, right? I fear that the snow will never end, right? All of these sentences that have this attitude, that express these attitudes, or the sentences towards which I express these attitudes. Um, those are the propositions, and the attitude that I express toward them. It could be belief, desire, hope, fear. These are my propositional attitudes. That's one way we can understand mental states. And again, that seems like a really different sort of thing than physical stuff. So why does it seem like the mental and the physical are so different? question in the chat. Um, no, I wouldn't say that they're propositional attitudes. Pains and pleasures are like sensations, but sensations have a mental component. For example, that there's something that it's like to have sensations, right? There's something that it's like to be in pain, something that it's like to be in pleasure, a state of pleasure, and they're not the same. But that subjective sort of experiential quality seems to be different than the physical machinery, we'll call it, that underwrites those experiences. Yeah, like Khalid, I think, puts it pretty well here in the chat. Um, Mental states are, well, mental, and they're many of them are subjective. Subjective in the sense that they're experienced by a subject from a point of view, right? Where, like what you say here, Khalid, the physical stuff is based on the laws of nature, etc. That's objective, right? Well, you can have so I think what you might be trying to say, Sean, is that you can have beliefs that you are in pain, right? Like if I stub my toe, there's the sensation, ow, and then there's also my you could call it a perceptual belief, like, oh, I believe I'm in pain right now, and I would be right. Right? So there's that. That would be a propositional attitude. So there's one theory of the mental, and it's called dualism. And there are a couple of different versions of it, but we're going to look at both of them today. But dualism says that the mental and the physical oh, excuse me, are completely different, different kinds of things. There's two different versions, as I said. There's substance dualism, which says that um, there's physical substance and then there's mental substance. And then there's property dualism, where um, everything is physical. There's no mental substance. But some things have mental properties, like humans or certain non-human animals. Mhm. So, uh, like I have mental properties, but the chair I'm sitting on doesn't, even though we're both made out of physical substance. That's property dualism. Then there are the physicalists who say that everything is ultimately physical. Property dualists are really, a sort of physicalist. They just don't think there are only physical um, properties. I mean, well, they're not physicalists, they're substance monists. Although somebody would probably argue with me about this, it's no big deal. We used to call physicalism materialism, and we'll encounter this notion again when we talk about freedom of the will. Materialism is an older view. It views the universe as a mechanistic sort of place where it's matter in motion, governed by the laws of nature. We've sort of updated our terminology, right? Because there's not just matter. There's like electromagnetic fields, gravitational fields. There's things like charge and spin, various physical properties, various force fields. And these are not made of matter, but they're still physical. Another way you can understand physicalism is the stuff that physics studies, right? I mean, physical just comes from physis, which is the ancient Greek for nature. So that's why we've updated it. So keep that in mind. We might use these terms interchangeably, but I think the proper one is physicalism, not materialism. Khalid asks, could it be argued that the mental states and events are different because they are filtered by the mind and all of its bias in a way that helps us understand? Um, Kind of like Kant, kind of like Kant's transcendental idealism. Is that what you mean? Yeah. And some people do argue that. I mean, Kant's position is called transcendental idealism. But representative realism, you kind of get a little bit of a bit of this in the representative realism camp, right? Um, but then the question is still whether what the mind is doing is ultimately physical or whether it's something else. That's the question, right? And that's what divides the camp between uh, dualism and non-dualistic views. So, we define the physical not just in terms of the findings of science, but also our senses, right? Our senses deliver to us um, representations of the physical world, of the natural world. Um, this table that my laptop is on, or better yet, this concrete wall behind me. It's solid. It's kind of a eggshell color. It's got some holes in it. Makes a sound when I knock on it. Um, I guess I could smell the wall or taste the wall, but I'm not going to do that. Um, that's one sense in which the physical that I can access the physical. Um, but then there's the sciences too, right? And remember, the sciences offer us almost like extensions of our senses, right? I can only see things that are so small. So what can we do when we can't see beyond, our let's say our spatial, like when we hit the limit of our spatial granularity, well, we use a microscope. Or there's things in the sky, right? Like that are so far away we can't see them with the naked eye. So what do? You use a telescope. There are types of electromagnetic radiation that we can't see. So what do we do then? Well, maybe we use a spectroscope, right? And that can tell us more about nature, but it's like an extension of our senses. Physicalism is a sort of substance monism, by the way. So earlier I mentioned there's substance dualism and property dualism. Property dualism is also a type of substance monism. Substance dualism is the opposite of substance monism. So substance monism says that there's only one kind of substance. And I know we've talked about substance a lot, but for today you can think of substance as that which can exist independently. So, we've talked about the substance attribute framework. We've talked about substances of stratum. We've talked about bundle theory, which denies that there are substances. Um, Berkeley's factual phenomenalism says that uh, the fundamental substance is mind or idea. And there's a lot of views that we haven't had a chance to cover. For Spinoza, um, it's God. Um, for Leibniz, it's monads. Um, for physicalists, it's physical stuff, matter, energy, force fields, um, other physical properties, right? Now, we get back to where we began. It seems like our mental life is made up of things that are very, very different from physical objects, doesn't it? I mean, let's say we want to take a stab at describing how vision works. We can do this physically. I can talk about how there's light in my environment, and that light is reflected off of the surfaces of various objects. Some wavelengths are absorbed by certain objects, and some are reflected. For example, the shirt I'm wearing reflects red, which is why it appears red. So light of a certain wavelength, I think it's around 700 nanometers or something, enters my eye through my pupil and strikes my retina. And I've got rods and cones in my retina. The cones are the color detectors. But my rods and cones both are affected by the light in such a way that they phototransduce the light into signals that travel down my optic tract, down through the optic nerve, and eventually reaches my visual cortex, which is at the back in the occipital lobe. Causes a bunch of activity to happen there. Different neurons start firing, and poof, I have a visual representation of my shirt, or my coffee cup, or the wall behind me. But here's the thing, my conscious experience, the redness of the shirt, my experience of redness here, is different than the eggshell color of the wall. The shirt is soft, but the wall is hard. The coffee cup, likewise, is different. Look, they've introduced the Christmas coffee cups already. Blech. Too soon. But I guess Starbucks is going to Starbuck. Now that's different, or at least it seems different than all of the physical stuff I've just described. Question in the chat. Oh, it's just lol. And so all of this leads some people to ask whether there is something more to the mind than the physical. And so we're going to learn about that today. We're going to learn about a couple of varieties of dualism. But first, I just want to make sure that we're all clear on something. This is the difference, or the apparent difference, between the mental and the physical. Does it sound straightforward to you? Like, say I look at my Christmas coffee cup and I see, well, I guess technically it's a holiday coffee cup, but I don't know, it looks pretty Christmassy to me. So, it's got red, green, white. Okay, so I'm having this conscious visual experience of the coffee cup, and that experience is a certain sort of way. So there are neurons in my brain firing, representing the shape of the cup, the colors, all of its features. But those are just neurons firing, right? I'm having this experience of a red, green, and white coffee cup, an experience that is possible because of physical events in my brain. But there's nothing green, red, or white, or coffee cup like in my brain. See what I mean? And that's why some people say, well, there's something more to the mind than just the physical. And those are the dualists. So let's talk about dualism. And let's just see how we're doing for time. Pretty good. So on dualism, the mental is non-physical. The mind is not a physical thing. A dualist might say that we could describe every physical fact about the universe there is. But if we did that, we'd be leaving something very important out, and that is a description of the mental. So what is it that motivates this claim that the mental is non-physical? Well, there's a couple of things we have to keep in mind about the mental. Mental states have content, right? Remember my propositional attitude? I believe that it is snowing, which right now, by the way, would be a false belief because it is not snowing, at least not where I am. So say I have a belief that it is snowing. Well, my mental state, my belief has content. The content of my belief is the proposition. It is snowing. We could also say that my belief is about whether or not it is snowing in my immediate vicinity, right? So mental states have content. They're about things. If I look at the coffee cup and I have a visual representation of the coffee cup, my mental state is about the coffee cup, right? So we call this intentionality. Intentionality. It doesn't mean like It's got nothing to do with intentions that we have, like, oh, I have an intention to drink coffee this morning before I start lecturing. No, it's not used in the colloquial sense. It's a technical term, which says that there's this sort of aboutness um, when it comes to mental states. Mental states are about things. They're about the things they represent specifically. Now, mental states also have feeling or subjectivity, right? There's something it's like to be in pain. If you stub your toe, there's something particular about stubbing your toe. There's a sort of unique, phenomenal, subjective characteristic to it that is different from, say, getting a paper cut. They're both pain, but one is different than the other. Getting a paper cut is like getting a paper cut, but stubbing your toe is like stubbing your toe. Think of the aroma of coffee, right? You can tell I'm not sufficiently caffeinated yet because I keep drinking the coffee, but coffee, has a particular taste. It's different than tea, or even the different purveyors of coffee on campus, right? What if we got like roughly, I think, three, and no, we've got more than three, but let's go with the big three. We've got a bunch of Starbuckses. Um, we've got Bridgehead. We got Roosters. I always order a light roast with two creams and one sugar. But if I do that at Starbucks, coffee tastes a little different than it does at Roosters, and that tastes a little different than it does at Bridgehead. Um, so there's something that it's like, right? A loyal Bridgehead consumer, yeah. Well, they're local, um, but they don't have, at least on the campus, they don't have light roast. Five brands, Galen. Yeah, there's another one. There's the one in the Tunnel Junction, and then there's Tim's. There's a Tim Hortons. Yeah, Natalie, that's right. Um, so you know, Leo's is the one at Tunnel Junction. Yeah. So all of these, say you go in there, they don't all have light roast, but you get yourself a medium roast coffee, even though it's identifiably similar, they're all slightly different. And these little felt aspects of our experience we call qualia or quale for singular. So the aroma of my blonde roast from Starbucks here, that's a quale. And it's different from the quale of a medium roast from Bridgehead. Um, the color of a sunset is a quale. There's something it's like to watch a sunset, which is different from what it's like to watch a moonrise, for example. So these little felt aspects of experience that individuate different subjective experiences from another and give them their unique phenomenal character, we call them qualia or quale singular. And this what its likeness of our conscious experience uh, is the phenomenology. So sometimes we call this phenomenal consciousness. Um, Phenomenal consciousness is the sort of consciousness where there's something that it's like to have the experience. Now, dualists say that in order to explain intentionality and qualia, we need to look outside of the physical in some sense or another. Now, who's ready for a thought experiment? This is a fun one. Mary the scientist, Mary the color scientist. So, Mary, this is from Frank Jackson, an Australian philosopher. And it's part of his knowledge argument against physicalism, which he actually later changed his mind about. But let me give you I'll give you the thought experiment. We'll run through it together. Then we're going to talk about the knowledge argument and what it all means for dualism and physicalism. So this is a thought experiment called Mary's Room. Mary is a color scientist. So she knows, she lives in the future where knowledge of color is complete. So Mary knows everything about the physics of color. She knows everything about the neuropsychology of color. She knows every physical fact there is to know about color. But here's the catch. Mary has spent her whole life in this black and white room. When you're in the room, there is no color. Even if Mary were to look at her own hands, right? It's all grayscale. She doesn't see color. She's never seen color before, but she knows every physical fact about color. One day, we let Mary out of the room. She sees color for the first time. Now, here is where I need to hear from all of you. Will Mary be surprised when she sees something red for the first time? Will she say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know red would look like that"? Or, since she knows every physical fact about color, would she say, "Oh, I knew red would look like that"? So a few people think she'd be surprised. She hasn't experienced it before. So if you think Mary will be surprised, you might be a dualist. And if you think Mary would not be surprised, you might be a physicalist. That's what thought experiments are for, by the way. Thought experiments um, help us to clarify our thinking about certain things, in this case, about consciousness. You might not know how you feel um, about dualism versus physicalism. Uh, but if you run through this thought experiment, you find yourself having a strong intuitive pull in one direction or another, and that could tell you more about what you think of dualism versus physicalism, right? Yeah, it is like that. Could you explain red to a blind person? Probably not, um, because they haven't experienced red. Um, I mean, if they were heavily visually impaired. Most visually impaired people actually do have a little bit of sight. Um, but imagine no sight at all. Then, yeah, how could you explain it to somebody? How could you explain what red is like to Mary in the room? Well, some would say that you can't. But others would say, of course you can. You just have to do it in the neurophysiological language of color. So that's what it is. It's true. Yeah, there are those color blindness glasses. But the thing is those people are not exactly in the same position as Mary, because we've allowed Mary to know everything there is to know about the physics of color and the neuropsychology of color vision. Yeah, that's the other thing. Galen, that's a good point. Um, so could the weak argument also be used to the same effect as the knowledge argument in order to challenge physicalism? The weak argument. What's the weak argument? Oh, I'm not sure. Um, yeah, I'm actually not sure. I'm not familiar with that one. But if it's part of the same series of arguments that he's offering against physicalism, why did he change his mind? I think it had something to do with it has something to do with what you allow Mary to actually know in the thought experiment. Like Daniel Dennett argued that if we think that Mary will be surprised, we've broken the rules. We haven't allowed her to know everything about color. Now, Dennett is a physicalist, so Dennett says if we really allow Mary to know everything about color, she would know what red would look like, right? And he kind of flips it. He says, like, okay, so let's let Mary out of the room and give Mary a trick banana, right? We'll give her like a blue banana, but Mary knows bananas are supposed to be yellow. So, like, will Mary recognize that it's a trick banana or not? And a lot of people apparently say, well, yeah, Mary would recognize this is a trick banana. Bananas are supposed to be yellow instead of blue, right? Um, so it's really to do with what you really allow Mary to know. That's kind of what this counter argument turns on, Yusuf. Yeah. Yeah. Now, let me make it simple. Um, some people would say that if Mary is surprised, it's not because she learned a new physical fact, but she came to experience it from a different perspective. So Mary now has knowledge how. She has procedural knowledge instead of knowledge that or propositional knowledge. That's one way to look at it. But Jackson at the time said, if we think that Mary will be surprised, that means there must be something beyond just physical facts. So if Mary knows all of the physical facts, and then she's surprised by how red looks, that means there must be non-physical facts. So that means that physicalism must be false. And that's why this is part of the knowledge argument against physicalism. If physicalism is true, every fact must be ultimately a physical fact. But if Mary is surprised, that implies that there are more kinds of facts than just physical ones. So physicalism must be false. You see, do you see do you see what I mean? Perfect. I think so too, Sean. Like if we think this is my intuition, so you don't have to agree with me, but I do think that if Mary is surprised, maybe it's because we've broken the rules and we haven't actually allowed her to know everything. Either that or she doesn't gain a new type of propositional knowledge, but rather just procedural knowledge. She knows how red looks now. Um, okay. Khalid says the weak argument could be used in this case because it stipulates that physical information can't account for our experience, and so physicalism is false. It sounds like really just the same thing. Like Mary's room illustrates this. That's the point, right? Nicholas says if we can understand other electromagnetic frequencies, starting with a visible spectrum, would someone not be able to intuit the visible spectrum from the infrared spectrum? Um, well, I think maybe this is kind of like what Dennett is getting at with his example of the trick banana, right? Um, and again, to reiterate, like if we really allow Mary to know everything there is to know about color and color vision, she would know what red would look like, or she would know that bananas are yellow, and that and she would know what yellow looks like. So if we gave her a trick banana, she'd say, "Wait a minute, this isn't a banana. Bananas are supposed to be yellow, not blue, right?" Yeah, that's right. Procedural knowledge kind of gets left behind in epistemology, doesn't it? Epistemology's epistemology is really like focused. It's almost like propositional knowledge chauvinism. You know, that's what's had the special place. Um, that's what the special focus of epistemologists have been on, at least in the analytic tradition. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different if you look at like the phenomenologists who are kind of more associated with the continental side of things. But it's starting to change. I think especially in the cognitive sciences, like there's been a massive change of focus. Um, Kind of for maybe like close to a century now, the focus has shifted more toward like embodiment, situatedness, um, just, the idea that minds are not these disconnected, uh, brain in the vat sort of things. Like we're embodied creatures that exist in the world, and there is a how to all of this, in addition to a that, right? Yeah, actually, that's good. That's good. Yeah, Nagel's. What is it like to be a bat? That's right. We could describe bat physiology completely in theory, but would that tell us what it's like to be one? To experience the world in terms of sonar rather than vision. I mean, bats actually have pretty good vision. Bats are not blind. That old adage is a myth, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. Um, but what is it like for a bat that's flying around emitting sonar clicks and sensing its environment that way versus the way we do it, where we rely primarily on vision? Um, Nagel would say there's not really any way to tell. And he's highlighting the problem of subjectivity, right? He's got a different point to make than Jackson does. I mean, Jackson's arguing against physicalism, whereas Nagel is saying, like, look, because of the subjective nature of consciousness, it might not be the kind of thing that science can help us out with. Yeah. Anyway, if you're thinking of essay topics, consciousness is a good one. You could talk about. I think one of the topics I gave you was thought experiments. Uh, but you could also do consciousness. Um, that would be cool. Okay. So, like I said earlier, there are two types of dualism. Substance dualism. This is associated with Rene Descartes. And it says that there are two different types of substances. There's mental substance and physical substance. And then there's property dualism. It's a kind of substance monism, as I mentioned earlier, where there's only physical substance, so matter, energy, those physical things we talked about earlier, but there are non-physical properties that emerge when matter is arranged in the right kind of way, like brains, or better, whole persons with brains. So that's property dualism. Substance dualism is a type of substance dualism, but property dualism is a type of substance monism. And but there are two kinds of properties. So just keep that in mind. First, we're going to go with substance dualism. Um, so mental objects here are minds or souls. Um, Minds do not have physical properties. And the physical doesn't have mental properties. And Rene Descartes is probably the most famous substance dualist because he initiated it. Um, Descartes thought that we have there's extended substance. That's what we might call matter. It's extended in the sense that it takes up space, right? So the table, right, that my laptop is sitting on, it has mass. It takes up space. It's extended in space and through time. So it's what we would call a physical object today. But that's quite different from res cogitans, which is Latin for thinking substance or mind. So substance dualism, at least Descartes' version, says that there are these two types of substances. There are other kinds. If you go all the way back to Plato, you'll find that he's also a dualist. For him, the soul is something like a spiritual substance. The mind is just the soul or a spirit. Um, and then there's material stuff. Um, and the soul is associated with the perfect forms. So the soul is immortal, indestructible, divine. The body is corporeal, corruptible, will one day break down and die and decompose. So that's a sort of dualism. Most dualists nowadays, though, are property dualists, not substance dualists. I mean, there are some. Well, when I say most people, I mean most philosophers. But actually, there probably are quite a great many substance dualists, um, in the sense that they believe in some version of the soul, right? So in the chat, what's going on in the chat? Um, yeah, like you mean according to Plato's, Khalid? I would say yes. Yeah. Yeah, the soul is like perfect. And the soul like gets its life from the form of life. Um so it can't die, it can't decay, just like how the perfect forms can't. That's according to Plato. And it's interesting because Plato's philosophy really did play quite a big influence on early Christian thought. So the views of the soul that started to take shape when Christianity started to diverge from Judaism, some of that um, is due to Plato, which is really interesting because some of those early church thinkers, like Saint Augustine, were Neoplatonic philosophers. Similarly, Aristotle's notions of the soul and of not just the soul, but human development and ensoulment when the soul enters the body actually were very influential on Islamic scholars, who were like reading his work. Remember, they called him the first teacher for a reason. So that's very interesting to see where these various sort of traditions have bumped up against one another. But but to return to my previous point, I think it is very interesting that there are actually a lot of dualists today, but they're not necessarily philosophical dualists. They're dualists because maybe it's part of what their religion teaches, right? So, for example, if some of you believe in a soul that I don't know, survives the death of the body, and that is essentially you. Like many religions teach this, where like what you ultimately are is not your body, but your soul. That's also a kind of dualism, but you don't really see that very much in philosophy, although you do kind of just amongst people in general. So I think that's pretty cool. Um, Descartes also thought that we come to know about our mind and the contents of our own minds via introspection. That's what makes my thoughts mine. That's what makes my pains and pleasures and emotions mine, and not yours. They occur to me, right? I am the subject of those mental events. The reason why, for example, that my stubbing my toe is my pain and not yours is because it happens to me, not you. My belief that Ottawa's the capital city or that Carleton University is located in Ottawa is different from your belief that Ottawa is the capital or that Carleton is in Ottawa, because those beliefs occur within my mind, not within yours. Well, you have your own beliefs too, which are yours. We might believe the same thing. I'm sure we all believe that or that the capital of Canada is Ottawa. But we don't all share the same belief in the sense that we literally share the mental state. You have a mental state. I have a mental state. The content is the same, but they're different mental states. Okay, we're doing pretty good for time here. Let's talk about property dualism. Um, so as I said earlier, property dualists do things a little bit differently. They say there's only physical stuff, but if that physical stuff is put together in the right sort of way, it can have mental properties in addition to physical properties. Remember the big bucket of goo example when we were talking about Aristotle? We were talking about his hylomorphism, and I said that if you took all of the stuff that makes a human, water, carbon, calcium, iron, magnesium, etc., and you mix it all up in a bucket, you just have a bucket of goo. It's got to be put together in the right way. Now, for Aristotle, that was the soul, um, the form of a living body. The form informs the matter, such that I am a living human being rather than a bucket of goo. Um, same, or similarly, if the matter is arranged in the right way, not only does it have what we would call, I don't know, I'm hesitant to use the term, but we could say vital properties. Not only is it alive, but it might also have mental properties, which we all do. Right? Our brains are just made of matter. Our brains are made of stuff that occur naturally, but they're put together in such a way that they have mental properties. One way of putting this is to say that mental properties supervene on physical properties. So, this notion of supervenience says that, um, like any change, it says that the mental properties occur over and above the physical properties, and any change in the physical properties necessitates a change in the mental properties. So, all of my mental states kind of supervene on my brain states. And for there to be a change in my mental state, there has to be a change in the physical state or the brain state. Now, one similarity between substance dualists and property dualists is that they each agree that the mental is not reducible to the physical. We can't explain the mental by appealing to physical processes alone. The difference is that substance dualists argue this because they believe that the mental is just a different kind of substance than the physical, whereas the property dualists say it's due to supervenience or emergence or something like that. So, what are some arguments for dualism? When it comes to substance dualism, a big part of why we might want it to turn out to be true could be because it can explain freedom of the will as well as life after death. And here's where we're maybe getting a little bit closer to Plato. Um, but if something survives the death of the body being physical, like the soul surviving the death of the body, well, the soul must be non-physical. So that could be an argument for dualism. Or not an argument, but an appeal toward dualism. After all, like many the views of the soul in many of the major religions of the world are dualist, like in this sort of similar sort of way, to the sorts of things that Descartes or Plato espoused. Um, and most religions believe in some kind of afterlife. Maybe that's possible, if it is possible, because the soul is not physical. So that would be an argument in favor of dualism. Sean says, it seems odd to agree that the mental is not reducible to the physical. I can think of obvious examples where it is, such as ending one, entering the other. Yeah, like if you scramble my brains, no more me, or altering portions of the physical, changing how the mental. Yeah, yeah, the daredevils with the damaged fear sensors, or even drinking caffeine, right? These little caffeine molecules are, if I'm not mistaken, acetylcholine uh, agonists. And basically that means they make you feel less tired. Caffeine doesn't actually give you energy. It just makes you feel less fatigued. But if you really like coffee, then you're also going to get, the dopamine system is also going to kick in every time you have one because you look forward to that morning coffee cup, and that'll give you a bit of energy. Um, yeah, but like, is it Eliane? Hope I'm getting your name right, but as you say, maybe it's not that it's reducible to, but affected by. Because again, like I said earlier, like if I have a visual experience of redness, like on the cup or my shirt, if we were to look in the brain, there's nothing red in the brain, right? I was going to say Elaine, but then I thought, nope, that's not right. Um, so if I ever do get someone's name wrong, though, I apologize in advance because I'm not the best with names. Yeah, I mean, Sean, like there are people that agree with you though. They're called there's reductive physicalism, like type physicalism, which we'll learn about later. And then there's eliminativism, which says that let's just get rid of talk of the mental altogether and let's only talk about physical states. Like, don't talk about qualia. Talk about what's happening in the brain. Get rid of terminology, like subjectivity, consciousness, beliefs, desires. Get rid of it. We will learn about all of those views. Um, but yeah, getting back to it, argument for dualism. Maybe it preserves the possibility of life after death. Although a physicalist could also say maybe the soul can survive the death of the body in a certain sense. Like, what if we could somehow upload our minds into computers or into robot bodies or something? That's obviously not what the dualists have in mind, but it would be a kind of life after death if it were possible. Kind of like, have you ever seen those various episodes of Black Mirror, right? Now, is that the afterlife you want? Probably not. But technically, in a sense, I guess it's a sort of afterlife. But what about freedom of the will? Well, we'll learn more about this when we talk about free will. We have a whole chapter on free will, but physicalism seems to imply a determined universe. It implies a universe where everything that's happened is determined by prior conditions. It doesn't seem to leave a lot of room for freedom of the will. I mean, if I'm ultimately a physical being, um, it might feel like I'm making choices for myself. However, that could be an illusion. I might just be a big fleshy meat robot determined by the laws of physics. But it does seem like we have free will. It seems like we make choices. Um, and if that's true, maybe the explanation is because there is a non-physical mind. But a physicalist could say that, well, there might be physical laws, but there could also be mental laws that govern mental states. Um, Somebody like David Chalmers would probably offer you an argument like this. Chalmers is a sort of property dualist. So There are two arguments which are a little more important than the argument for the arguments that rely on freedom of the will or life after death, and they are the introspection argument and the conceivability argument. Basically, the introspection argument says that um, in the same way that our senses tell us about the physical world, introspection tells us about the mental world. Um, and you can see this if you read Descartes' Meditations, which I think you all should. Um, Descartes does quite a bit of introspecting uh, as he goes through the meditations. So maybe introspection reveals that the mind is non-physical. So you can see this in the following thought experiment. Here's another experiment. It's called Leibniz's mill. Leibniz said, imagine something like this. Imagine that you could shrink yourself down really tiny. And so you could walk around inside of a brain as if you were walking around inside of a mill, like a mill that grinds things and saws things and does things. It's powered by wind or water or something. Imagine the mind is like that, just a big giant mill. Or the brain is like that, and you could shrink down and walk around in it. Or just imagine that you shrink yourself down and you can walk around in the brain. You'd see a lot of physical things happening. You'd see the neurons firing. You'd see neurotransmitters flowing between the synapses. You'd observe changes in electrical potential in the synapses, but you wouldn't see thoughts. You wouldn't see perceptions. You wouldn't see memories. You wouldn't see any of those mental things. They just don't seem like physical things. So the idea behind Leibniz's mill is that introspection reveals the mind is non-physical. That's the idea. But what do you think? Do you agree that if you shrunk down, like imagine you could shrink yourself down and put yourself in a tiny submarine swimming around in the brain, would you be looking at those neurons firing and say to yourself, I don't see anything mental, only physical? Or would you say something like, well, these neurons firing, that's how the mental is realized? Or maybe that's what it's reducible to. Let's see. So Hyla says, kind of a question, but is mind different from the brain? Well, the dualists would certainly say so. Yes. Yes, they would. Substance dualists definitely would. Like Descartes would say that the brain is extended substance, res extensa, but the mind is thinking substance, res cogitans. And they're two different things. A property dualist would say the mind is the mental properties that supervene on the physical properties of brains, perhaps, right? So yeah, that's a good question. Pernille agrees with Leibniz. Interesting. Natalie says, wouldn't thoughts, memories, perceptions arise from the neurons firing, neurotransmitters? Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, some people would say that. That's what the physicalists would say. Absolutely. Well, that's kind of the intuition, Yusuf, that the thought experiment depends on, isn't it? Well, they would say if the mental was something physical, we'd be able to see it, but we don't. Or rather, we only see physical things. We don't see any mental things. So, like, whether this works on you depends on your intuitions about the mental and the physical. Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we're looking at the wrong perspective. A lot of physicalists, like especially emergentists, would say that you don't see a mind at the level of the synapses. The the mental properties are emergent properties. They emerge out of the complexity of the whole system. So we'd be looking with too fine a lens, right? Yeah, maybe things are getting mixed up here. Yeah, that's true, Sean. You wouldn't see like electromagnetic fields and microwaves coming out of cell phones if you went around a mill today. Yeah, I agree. Leibniz doesn't really address property dualism. But then again, for Leibniz, there's no interaction between any of these parts anyway. Isn't that right? It's all pre-established harmony. So of course you're not going to observe everything mental, anything mental. Or like anyway, let's not get stuck into Leibniz too badly because it gets weird talking about his monads and everything. Isaac says the brain itself is physical and the mental process are as well, but the result of all that is mental. Yeah, so you wouldn't see. I mean, how do you see a mental property? They're not like physical things, even if they're uh, reducible in some way. Well, a property dualist wouldn't say that, but even if it's the physical that gives rise to the mental, you're not then going to see the mental properties when you look at what the synapses in the brain are doing, right? And like some of you said, perception doesn't reveal the world the way it is. Um, like this is a coffee cup, but if I shrank myself down far enough, it would be like paper fibers. Or if I went real far down, I could see the atoms it's made of. Introspection could be like this as well. Well, Galen, some people would say that, yeah, the computer does have mental processes, and yeah, or cognitive processes, we'll say. But, um, yeah, you can't see the CPU doing the math. You could in principle, but when computers are operating, we don't see that happening, right? Anyway, I don't want to run out of time. Yeah, it is funny, Yusuf. This is a tricky subject because we all have very different intuitions about the mental and the physical, and before we can talk about it, we kind of have to clarify all of that, don't we? It's like Daniel Dennett says, philosophy is what you do when you don't know which questions to ask yet. And I feel like that's what we're doing now. Um, so maybe introspection, insofar as it is a sense, it's a type of perception. Maybe it doesn't reveal the way things really are. Maybe my thoughts, my memories, my emotions, everything I perceive, maybe they really are just neurons firing, but my introspection doesn't allow me to see this. Just like my visual perception doesn't allow me to see the paper fibers of the cup or the molecules or the atoms. Now, this doesn't disprove dualism, but it does raise concerns about the introspection argument. What about the conceivability argument? Well, this is like a metaphysical argument for dualism. Physicalists are making a metaphysical claim. They're saying everything that exists is physical. That is a metaphysical claim. So the further metaphysical claim is that the mind must be physical. It's necessarily physical. But a dualist could undermine this by demonstrating that it's logically possible for the mind to be non-physical. Now, logical possibility is not the same thing as physical possibility. Crumley's example is really good here. There's nothing logically impossible about going faster than the speed of light, but it is physically impossible. The laws of nature are just set up in such a way that you cannot go faster than the speed of light. But in a different universe, there might be a different speed of light. The speed of light in our universe is 300,000 kilometers per second. But I don't know, in another universe, maybe it's 300,001 kilometers per second. Um, so it's logically possible, but it's not physically possible. Um, so to show that something is logically possible, you have to show that it is conceivable. This is what conceivability arguments are all about. And we get this version of a conceivability argument that comes from Descartes. Descartes didn't put it exactly this way, but this is based on a reading of Descartes. Um, the first premise says that we can conceive of a mind existing separately from a body. And the second says that if we can conceive of something, then it's conceivable. Okay, so it's conceivable um, that a mind could exist separately from a body. The third premise says that if it's conceivable, then it is possible. Go ahead. Um, Now, it follows, according to the argument, that um, if it that it is possible, since it is conceivable, for the mind to exist separately from the body. And if that is true, as premise five says, then physicalism must be false. If it's possible for a mind to exist separately from the body, physicalism is false. Finally, if physicalism is false, then dualism is true. Our conclusion is dualism is true. Now, I'm just going to come right and say it. I don't buy it. But you might. Khalid says, the idea of conception equaling possibility appears to me quite similar to the cogito. Am I grasping at straws here, or do they share some underlying idea? Well, maybe what you're seeing is, I mean, Descartes arrives at the cogito via introspection, um, but then in so doing, he's conceiving of the mind as this essentially thinking thing, and from there, like the cogito is the foundation. And one of the things that he does, that he builds atop that foundation, is this conception that minds are separate from bodies, or minds can exist independently from bodies because they're not the same thing as bodies, right? I think maybe that's what you're seeing there. What's my opinion? Um, my opinion is that conceivability arguments are problematic. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, like Galen, that's a great example. Like, sure, like let's conceive of a flat Earth. The Earth ain't flat, right? Um, can I conceive of something red all over and green all over? No, I can't. Um, Although it's interesting, like in this chapter, Crumley talks about his student who claimed that she could conceive of a square circle, right? Um, uh, but that's impossible. Say that you can conceive of a square circle. A square circle cannot exist. So even if you could conceive of one, that doesn't mean it's possible, right? Um, so what this argument is supposed to do is show that it's possible for a non-physical thing to exist. And this itself is enough to show that physicalism has to be false. And at least if you're Descartes, the alternative to physicalism is substance dualism. But that's not all of the options. You could be an idealist, right? Like Berkeley and his factual phenomenalism. Um, you're a substance monist who believes only minds exist, only the mental exists. Um, But critics like myself focus on the move from conceivability to possibility, right? Like Crumley's student who could conceive of a square circle, but a square circle is logically impossible. We must be getting close to the end. We're running out of time. You know what? I don't think we're going to finish. We're going to make it through all of this, and I don't want to rush. So why don't we shut it down for today, and we'll pick this up again next week before we look at the materials for part two. How does that sound to all of you? Just remember that where we're leaving off is discussion of the conceivability argument. And then on Tuesday, we'll pick it up. We'll finish talking about conceivability, and then move on to part two, where we're going to look at token identity theory, well, type identity theory, type physicalism, token identity theory, functionalism, and the rest. Okay. Well, great work, everyone. Have a good weekend and think about the nature of the mental over the weekend. And then we'll be back to continue our discussion on Tuesday. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take it easy, and I'll see you later.